All right, let's jump right into talking about the biogeochemical cycle. So this is just a general term for all the moving of things in and out of living systems, all the biotic components of living systems and their environments, while the abiotic components of their environments as well. So when you're looking at the biogeochemical cycles, there's something I want you to be really fully aware of, and that is that the matter and the nutrients, they are cycling. Okay, so they're moving between the producers and the consumers and the detritivores. You probably think of decomposers. They are a subcomponent of the detritivores. But when we look at energy, energy flows through the system. It starts at the sun, moves through the producers, passes into the food chain through consumers, detritivores, your decomposers, and then out as heat energy, thermal energy. So just to recap, here it all is for you. You've got your nutrient cycling and your energy passing through. So remember, your producers, your consumers, your detritivores, that's your biomass. That's all the living tissue and matter on the planet. If you were to dehydrate everything, you could actually physically measure biomass. So now I just want to zero in on the nutrient side of this because we are talking about the biogeochemical cycles here. We're not talking about energy quite yet. So most of your elements that are going to be important to living systems have massive storage reservoirs in the abiotic parts of the ecosystem, and only a tiny bit is available to living systems. And that tiny bit is going to pass first into plants. And from plants, plants can die, move to the detritivores, and then be decomposed back into forms that the plants can use again. Plants can also be eaten by your consumers, your animals. Animals can then decompose. And then again, those decomposers can make those nutrients available to plants. Also, any of those nutrients that are in the soil available to plants can also become part of the abiotic components of the ecosystem again. So there is the whole thing drawn out for you, moving in and out of abiotic forms into the living systems, which are really colorful in this slide, and back into the abiotic parts of the ecosystem. So here we're looking at the water cycle, also called the hydrologic cycle. Really what I want you to get from this picture is just the massive numbers over the ocean. Look at those precipitation and evaporation numbers. That is a lot of movement of water in and out of the ocean. Just a little mini cycle there. And then you've got a lot of that water that's evaporating out of the ocean becomes the precipitation that would then come onto land. And the next slide shows that as well. But it also shows you that important term percolation. I also see it and call it sometimes infiltration, the water moving down through the soil into the groundwater where a lot of water again is stored, and then there is a flow through groundwater into the oceans, into lakes and streams. But what's really important to me when you're thinking about groundwater, so much filtering and cleaning of that water gets done when it's groundwater. So preventing infiltration and encouraging runoff can sometimes just move different pollutants into our streams rather than getting it down into the ground where a lot of those things can be neutralized. Another thing I want you to look at here is the evaporation ocean numbers, which is 413, versus the 73 over evaporation and transpiration. So even though, yes, most of the water that is evaporating is coming out of the ocean, a lot of it, about a fifth of that, is still coming from plants. So our vegetation, especially our large trees and forests, play a huge role in climate patterns and precipitation, and we really need to keep those in place in a healthy state because of the role they play in the water cycle, as well as for a number of other reasons. And very quickly, I just want to zero in on transpiration. It's probably a term you haven't heard before, or maybe only in passing, but if you look here, pretend that's the ground. And then you've got your plant and your water. And that water is going to travel through the roots up into the tissues of the body of the plant, and the pipe-like tissue that's going to bring that up into the plant is called the xylem. That will move towards the leaf tissues where a lot of photosynthesis is taking place and that water is needed. But some water is created by the process of photosynthesis, and so not all water molecules are going to get consumed by the plant. Some of them will leave through tiny holes called stomata, and they will evaporate, which this process, when it's done by a plant, is called transpiration, and they'll move into the air as water vapor. Okay, the carbon cycle. It can get a little complicated, so we're just going to start with the short-term carbon cycle, the carbon that's getting passed around frequently, back and forth and back and forth. And so that starts with carbon dioxide, moving into plants through photosynthesis. And then plants can actually respire. I know you may only think of animals as respiring, but plants give off some CO2, even though for the most part they are taking it in. The carbon in plants can be consumed by animals. And so now we're looking at that carbon has turned from carbon dioxide to carbohydrates, fats, proteins, which the plants synthesize, and now the animals are eating that organic carbon and, again, burning it for energy or using other, conversion methods. Like if we eat too many carbohydrates, those aren't necessarily going to stay as carbohydrates. They might get converted to lipids or fats, which we'll store. But some of that carbon we're going to exhale as carbon dioxide as we use it for energy. And so we've got another little mini cycle going here. And then remember that all living things can die and will die, and so decomposers will feed on those organic compounds, again, your carbohydrates, your fats, your lipids, fats, same thing, and your proteins. And they'll respire CO2 back into the atmosphere. So here's that whole short-term cycle. All right, get ready. Big cycle now. So the little cycle we just looked at is represented by these arrows. So hopefully you can pick out the photosynthesis arrow, the respiration arrows, the consumption arrow, things like that. Plants and animals can also become buried before they're fully decomposed, and those organic compounds can be converted into fossil fuels, which are very, very high energy or energy dense. And of course, we can burn those fossil fuels through the process of combustion, creating CO2 again, and putting it back in the atmosphere. CO2 in the atmosphere can become dissolved in the ocean. It can diffuse in and become various forms of the carbonate ion, so carbonic acid, the bicarbonate ion, and those forms of carbon are available to marine plants, and that starts the whole plant-animal decomposer cycle again that you saw up at the top at the very beginning. It can also start to get into abiotic forms when the carbonate ion, missed one thing. Remember, any of those marine animals and plants can become buried. But here we are, if we add calcium to carbonate, there are some organisms that can do this to make seashells and coral. And so that is getting the carbon stored in a form that can become sedimentary rock. And then sedimentary rock can be uplifted by tectonic plate movements, and then volcanic action will actually release CO2 back into the atmosphere. And so that is a really, really slow moving part of the carbon cycle. Those carbon atoms could sit as rock for millions and millions and millions of years. So here again are all the big places, the big carbon reservoirs. And it's hard to talk about the carbon cycle without talking briefly about the greenhouse effect. So I just want to point out some things here. First of all, that some of the radiation is getting reflected right away, deflected by the atmosphere. Most of it is going through the atmosphere and being absorbed by the surface of our planet. And so that's starting the warming of the planet. Then, as it reflects back, it will pass through the atmosphere, some of it, but some of it will also be absorbed and then re-emitted, because radiation can be absorbed and then emitted again, by any of those greenhouse gas molecules. And you can find lists of those all over the place, and there's a list of them coming up. So, that's a good thing. Warming the planet is a good thing. What we don't know is that too much, we know it's changing the climate. We're not sure. We know the planet is really good at balancing itself out and finding a new stable equilibrium, but all signs are pointing to the fact that this excess greenhouse effect is leading to very extreme weather, and it is cause for some concern. So here's that list of greenhouse gases I was promising. I want to point out just a couple of things. First of all your CFCs and their chemical brethren here, their relative warming potential is huge compared to the others, and look how long they can stick around in the environment. Methane, our cows give off a lot of this, has a pretty high warming potential compared to carbon dioxide. And then nitrous oxides, which also come from burning fossil fuels, have a very high potential compared to carbon dioxide. Okay, moving away from the carbon cycle and into the nitrogen cycle. This one, once you learn the terms and once you kind of get it in your head, it's a pretty simple one compared to the carbon cycle. So all nitrogen, we're going to start with nitrogen in the atmosphere. It cannot be taken in by living things in this dinitrogen form. Nitrogen fixation, think if you're fixated on a person, you're stuck there. Nitrogen fixation fixes that nitrogen into a form that can be found in the soil. And from the soil, it can be accessed by living things. And this is done by bacteria. Often those bacteria have a symbiotic relationship with plants, and they live in little nodules in their roots. This is especially seen in the legume family, your beans. They tend to enrich the soil with nitrogen because of how many nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in their roots, and that is a symbiotic relationship. Nitrate can be taken up by your plants and animals, and so now that form is in the soil. Ammonification can convert nitrates, again, bacteria, different species of bacteria are doing this process, into ammonia. And this can be done without oxygen being present. Other bacteria can nitrify. They can go through the process of nitrification and create nitrites, and those nitrites by other species can also become nitrates. And so again, now we've got a little cycle going on in the soil where bacteria living in aerobic conditions with oxygen can create nitrites and nitrates, forms that plants and animals can use, and then ammonification is just converting it to another form without oxygen being present. And then it can get back into the atmosphere. That's a process called denitrification, and surprise, there's a theme here. it's also being done by bacteria. This is the cycle that absolutely must have living things involved. Those bacteria are involved in just about every step. They are extremely important to the nitrogen cycle, and then you can add in the plants being very important to nitrogen fixation, which is essential if we want nitrogen in our soils so that plants can access it, and we can have nitrogen in our DNA and in our proteins. It's a pretty important compound to living things. And finally, phosphorus. This is again, really simple cycle here to learn on your own. I just want to point out another big theme coming out here: sediment. Sedimentation, sediments, uplifting, weathering, rocks, weathering, mining. The phosphorus on the planet is mainly found in rock. But it can be taken up from the soil and from the water by your autotrophs, your producers. And again, they incorporate that into some pretty important compounds, especially your nucleic acids, your DNA. So we really need this element, but we are just a very small part, living things are, of a much bigger sedimentary cycle.